We gotta find the right angle for you to see all of my head. Yep, that's me. Hello, beautiful bookish people. My name is Hannah, and today I read all of the books for my English class, which is rare. Like, I usually fake it a lot of the time because I'm like, I do not want to reread Heart of Darkness, nor will I, because I have standards for myself set in place. But for this semester, all the books were rather short and interesting, and I liked all the discussions we had. So I was like, why don't I just make a video about all the books I read for this one class this semester? I was like, oh, that sounds fun, and hopefully it sounds fun to you too. I have my coffee. I'm basically having breakfast with you guys.
Bruh.
And it's like you asked me over breakfast how my semester went. Well, let me tell you. Kinda sucked, kinda good. And that's life. So the first book, let's just jump into it. Let's skate over that comment about pessimism and talk about the first book, which was a picture book called The Three Little Pigs.
Wow.
Which was a postmodernist take on The Three Little Pigs, which should be like sound off the alarm for like, oh my gosh, that's the most pretentious picture book I've ever heard of. But you know what? Turns out I didn't hate it because I think it actually is a really great starter book for starting the discussion of postmodernists, because it kind of starts off in like a very like traditional way, and then like suddenly a pig comes out of frame, and then they kind of like take over their own story. And postmodernism loves to make you question reality, but I loved the fact that it made like the reader do the work. It allowed the reader to imagine what stories they were going into. And I love books that like basically the point of a message is like there's no right way to tell a story. Like, it's truly like metaphoric, it plays with meaning, and it reimagines like old aspects. It's like the definition of postmodernism. So yeah, I would highly recommend The Three Little Pigs. I think it's a fun little picture book. If you see it at your Barnes & Noble, just give it a quick little read. Think about postmodernism for a second. So here's to postmodernism. So the next book I read for class was surprisingly Cinder, which, I'm not gonna lie to you, is not my favorite young adult book series, but upon examination and like analyzing it under an academic lens, I actually really enjoyed the conversation that this book brought up, especially when talking about disability and identity theory. But I am getting ahead of myself just a little bit. Cinder is basically just a Cinderella retelling set in the future, and Cinderella is a cyborg. And my professor talked a lot about how like the definition of disability is discussed in Cinder, and how the definition of disability kind of needs to be changed. In fact, I'll link like a TED Talk down below that I found extremely helpful when talking about this subject, and it talks about just like the power of words and how like the simple connotation of like the fact that something is a disability, because there's a negative aspect associated with something that's a part of you, it simply like affects the way you think about it. Like, I think Cinder is an okay book, but I loved the examination that this was used for in that regard. And I think what's really cool and special about Cinder is like by the end of it, Cinder like re-examines like this particular aspect of her identity, meaning the cyborg part. And there's like this really cool conversation about how identity is truly just a continuous process. And I think Marissa Meyer uses like fairy tale analogies to say like, hey, you don't need to use the labels that people, families, and or society puts on you, because at the end of the day, Cinder uses her own terminology for who she is. So yeah, Cinder is an okay book with really cool discussions, in my opinion. All right, so the next book that I had to read for school was Vasilisa the Beautiful and Baba Yaga. So Baba Yaga is this Russian folklore or mythology that is almost depicted as like the necessary evil of culture, which is really interesting because like I loved her. She's like a bad guy, but like a bad guy you can get behind because like you understand all of her reasonings. So, but Vasilisa the Beautiful is basically like a Russian version of Cinderella. Cinderella is being mistreated by her stepmother, so she goes into the forest and makes a deal with Baba Yaga for this seemingly impossible task. She must collect this impossible item. But if you do it, Baba Yaga will uphold her end of the bargain and perform justice on the stepmother. And since we read like so many different versions of Cinderella, we also read like the Grimm's one, FYI. I think you can really tell like the morals of society based on their interpretation of Cinderella, because in Vasilisa, it's interesting because like most times like adventure quests are seen as like beneficial for their character as they're like trying to seek knowledge or strength or whatever, but in Vasilisa it's like the exact opposite. It's seen as dangerous, which my professor talked about was like very much a part of Russian culture. Like they didn't want you to do dangerous things. They wanted you to obey your mothers and all this stuff. So like reading like these stories, like the Cinderella stories back to back, it's just really interesting to see what values they hold. But honestly, Baba Yaga is a living legend. She has this like really cool twisted reality, and it just makes you question morality, which I love in my fairy tales. So that one was honestly really cool. I don't have that much else to say about it, but that's what I learned. And the next book I read was Golem. No, not that one. It's actually Jewish folklore. I don't know if I told you the class I was taking, but it was world literature with an emphasis on mythology. So hopefully that is explaining all of these texts. I don't know why that took me so long to think of the word. But Golem and was typically used as a weapon or a shield, or used to create agency for the creator. And the thing I found most fascinating about the Golem story is it's actually the inspiration for Frankenstein. Like this inspired this, you know, just the more you know. Like it's the same archetype. Like Mary Shelley uses this archetype to create her version of Frankenstein. Because like I think the core tenet of it is it's about a creation story about someone who shouldn't be creating life and kind of the consequences of that. It's all about the creation story and the debate of the soul, which all fascinate me. I'm not gonna lie to you. So yeah, Frankenstein is really Golem from Lord of the Rings. You heard it here first.
When two worlds collide.
We're just having a quick snack break, breakfast break, before I continue to talk about required reading. The next book that I had to read for class was actually Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, and I only had to read one story from this, so I can only tell you about the one story I had to write a discussion post about, which was when Thor went to visit the land of the giants, and there's this big discussion of illusions. So, here we go. I'm going to tell you the story really quickly, hopefully in 30 seconds. Ready and go. So, Thor goes to visit these giants with Loki and his friends, and he has like a big mouth and disrupts the giants. And then boom, the giants are like, well, you know what? Prove your worthiness to us. And they're like, fine, we'll do what we have to do. And so Thor has an arm wrestling contest, Loki has an eating contest, and then their other friend has a racing contest, and they all lose. But they find out that these competitions were actually illusions. Like, Thor was wrestling the actual embodiment of death. Loki was doing his competition against the embodiment of wildfire, and the other one was racing against the embodiment of thought. And that's the illusion, that's the metaphor. You're like, oh, it's okay that gods fail. And that's the story that I had to write my discussion post about. Editing Hannah, did I make it? 30 seconds?
Not even close, bro. Try harder.
Well, I am from the South, so we do talk a little slower. That's what we're gonna blame it on. We're gonna blame it on Texas. Like I said, but what I really enjoy about Norse mythology, fun fact, I'm Norwegian, is that it lets its gods fail. And even though they are gods, they are fallible and have human tendencies to them. The best way I can explain it is like when you watch an older sibling fail and you're more likely to do better because you watched your sibling fail. I think that's what Norse mythology does. There's always balance in Norwegian mythology, and I like that, you know, an eye for an eye. And there's no story I think that's gonna be wrapped with a bow, because Norse mythology really has that discussion of pursuing perfection is a delusion, and even for their gods, which is really nice. So, Norse mythology, I hope you learned something about illusions and how they're always a metaphor. So, next. So, the last and final book that I had to read this semester for this class was American Gods, which brings all that mythology into one book. So, American Gods is basically about this guy named Shadow who recently came out of prison, and on his journey home, a deity or a god offers him a deal to basically be his bodyguard in this new world. And so because Shadow is very new to this world, there's a lot of explaining, there's a lot of world building, there's a lot of mythology, and there's a lot of just genuinely stuff that Neil Gaiman is good at. But what I think inevitably what this book is trying to do is just make you think about culture. I think American Gods explores the idea that like people are culture. What we believe in, what we align our trust in, what we decide to do is culture. And it's gonna make you question what you worship too. I think there's also like a really big theme in this book about sacrifice, which is really nice because as discussed in the Norse mythology section, I love when there's an eye for an eye element in anything. I think American Gods will make you question what culture is. It'll make you question what you worship. I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to American Gods, but what I loved the most about it is the conversations that surrounded culture. And what is culture and what is American culture? What is Western civilization? Neil Gaiman, tell me. If that kind of conversation interests you, American Gods is a pretty fun book to explore those ideas. But actually that is the last book that I read this semester. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Keep reading and all that jazz. I don't want to brag, but last night I slept all the way through the night. My dog was down here the whole time and you didn't even see her. Thank you for your moral support though. I'm gonna go get a classic to look studious. Loki was eating against the embodiment of wildfire. What? Loki was wrestling. Loki, gosh dang it. It's because I'm trying to go fast. Girl, put your records on. Tell me your favorite song. It's Paradise Lost. And it's annotated. That's right. We're an English major. I can't.